The 88th Texas legislature is moving full steam ahead. In fact, state lawmakers have filed almost 4,000 bills and resolutions so far, and there's still plenty more to come. With so much legislation moving through the process, it can be hard for the average person to keep up, but don't worry. TPPF is here to help you stay informed about the policies that matter. This is The Layout. I'm James Quintero, Policy Director here at the Foundation, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Chairman Paul Bettencourt. Mr. Chairman, welcome aboard.
Well, thanks for letting me come in on an Ash Wednesday interview.
Well, thanks for your time. Mr. Chairman, let's jump right in. What's the problem that we're trying to solve with SB 1039?
Well, the problem's pretty horrific. The problem is the nation's third largest county put on a third world election. And for the first time in my life, I've seen a county elections administrator or election authority put on a countywide election, and they had not given out the appropriate amount of ballot paper for all the precincts so that the presiding judges could hand ballot paper to the voters that came in. So thousands of voters were turned away on polls in Harris County because government put on an election and didn't get the ballot paper out of the warehouse. And later, the election administrator said he had 4 million sheets of ballot paper, but he couldn't get it to the polls. Either wouldn't or couldn't. And as a result, there's 21 active election challenges. I've never seen such a consternation in the electorate before. And I've never seen people, James, more disappointed in their government, because it's literally a third world response to have an election without ballots.
So can you take us through the bill? How does it work?
Well, why I'm talking about that as the primary evidence of why we need the bill. This is an election audit bill. We've actually filed a version of this as far back in the special sessions 2 years ago. And basically, what gets measured gets fixed. And here's how it works. If you have a election irregularity, people can ask questions of their election authority, the county clerk, election administrator. When I was a voter registrar, I used to get questions all the time, but I would answer them. What's happening now in this frothy 21st century version of election politics is that if you ask a question, you're labeled an election denier. And that has to stop. We have to get back to the regular order of business in this country, which is people can ask questions of the government and give them answers. So the bill basically says you can do that twice. And then if you don't get a response that's adequate, you can ask the Secretary of State to effectively intervene. And they could order an election audit based upon an election irregularity, petition from people that have standing, which are party chairs, precinct chairs, presiding judges, ballot, committee members, candidates, et cetera. And what's great about that is it gets the lines of communication open again. What really frosted me about what's happened in Harris County is that multiple people in the job, an appointed clerk, 2 election administrators, they're being told by their county attorney, do not respond. And so the public still doesn't know, months later, why we didn't have enough ballot paper at the polls for people to vote on. And that's got to end. So that's really the crux of Senate Bill 1039 is that it's an election audit bill, but really what it does is enforces communication to start with, leaving the Secretary of State the option to have an audit if they can't figure out what the problem is.
So if the bill were to become law, then you would say that trust and transparency in the system would improve?
Absolutely, because that's why my chairman, Senator Hughes, signed on. Because what we've seen is that because of these election irregularities, especially what's happening in Harris County, the trust in the system is very low. Now, that's part of the froth of the debate in politics in the country, but you cannot have an election without having top-down guidelines, aka laws from the state of Texas, administered by the local county election authority. And more importantly, if they don't do it because either they can't or they won't, then you've got to take action to make sure this is not repeated again in the future.
Mm-hmm. So how would you respond to critics who would argue that the system is fine, we don't need any changes, let's continue on with the status quo?
Well, first off, we've had now, there's multiple irregularities around the state. We've seen them, where, there's problems with a few hundred votes in a county. Maybe they found something in a canvass, a couple hundred votes here and there. We've got one single family residence in Wichita Falls that has over 570 people that live there, and it's some type of combo business address, and there's like 176 of them voted. And I actually sent them a letter, the county clerk, and said, fix this problem, after we passed a couple other bills, Senate Bill 1111, 1113. So we got those problems. But in Harris County, we got a really big problem. Mm-hmm. The previous audit found of the 2020 election that 184,999 votes had no chain of custody on their mobile ballot boxes, which is basically, to the layman, it's a tabulation unit. And their serial numbers changed from when they were in the field to when they were used at central count. So outgoing Secretary of State John Scott sent a letter and said, whatever happens in the 22 election, don't do this again. Well, they didn't have that problem, but they just blundered into a disaster of not giving out enough paper ballots to polls that had voted more in the last election 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. They still shorted them. Now, and because there's close elections, it matters. And that's why there's election contests, more 21 than ever I've seen in my entire lifetime in one election in Harris County. Mm-hmm. Now, there's also a backdrop to this about elections administrators. We're really wondering why we have them, okay? Because when I was a voter registrar, I was a tax assessor. I had a great county clerk, Beverly Kaufman. I thought we were, the A team of elections. And what to me happens since they've taken it away from the elected officials, there's no accountability. Mm-hmm. And the previous election administrator, in a primary, low election turnout, there was a lawsuit. She walked into court Thursday after the election on Tuesday, said she had counted all the ballots, swore to the judge. The judge dismissed the case. And at 10:30 at night, on a Saturday night, after the local newscast, out pops a press release. Oops, we found 10,000, 6,000 Democrat, 4,000 Republican votes. I'm not making this stuff up, okay? And she had to resign in place at the commissioner's court meeting just a few days later because both political parties were so mad. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody should be mad about an election where there's not enough ballots for people to vote, because in Harris County, it's countywide, countywide polling places. So you don't know who's walking into these polls, even though those polls were clearly more in a Republican area than not. But you can have people that are libertarians, Democrats, independents walking in there, and they were told they didn't have ballot paper. You can't have it. Mm-hmm. This is the 21st century. I'm not going to let the nation's third largest county go into a third world election contest. And also, they're too big to ignore. Because I was just in Washington last week. I mean, Harris County by itself is the size of the 26th largest state in the union. Mm-hmm. And they're a huge part of the Texas electorate. The elections have to run correctly. And we have to set up a process, what I call civil practices, civil discourse. Instead of suing and waiting for disclosure and the county attorney saying you can't talk about what happened, get questions asked, get answers from the election authorities. That should resolve 95% of this. If you have to go to the Secretary of State, you go. But if you won't tell the Secretary of State what's happening, or if they do an election audit, find out that you've really violated the code, they could put a conservator in, like we do on school districts, that say, that person says, here's how you run elections right, just like we have that person in schools, here's how you run a school right.
So looking ahead, do you feel pretty confident about the legislature taking action on this bill?
Well, we've passed this bill out of the state Senate twice, okay? And I expect that we'll pass it out of the Senate again. And I think there's a new elections committee that's very interested in solving this problem. I've never seen so much, executive sponsorship from the governor, lieutenant governor, on down that really want to get this problem resolved. Because you just can't let your voter roll degrade and your election practices go contrary to state law, because that's really what's occurring here. And you've got to, for democracy to succeed and survive, you've got to have a voter roll with integrity, and you've got to follow election procedures, whether it's federal or state. And you just can't have people changing their mind or stonewalling inquiries. I'm going to have a relatively humorous video out shortly. And I'm an old fan of Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes, and you'll see him prominently displayed when people don't respond to media inquiries. And that all has to stop. Look, you've got to get everybody registered, everybody to vote one time, their vote to count. They can't be turned away because an election authority won't give out ballot paper. And then you got to be able to count them and reconcile the votes, have a canvass, and know who won. And that's what this bill does. That's what this audit bill is designed to do. And it gets us out of just random audits. See, right now we've got a random audit of 4 counties out of 254, too large, too small. It'd take over 100 years to audit all the small counties. So this gets us into the game of measuring what we need and fixing it. So what gets measured gets fixed.
Well, this is a very important bill that we'll be keeping an eye on. Good luck to you, sir, and thanks for stopping by.
No, anytime. Just glad I could crash TPPF on an Ash Wednesday.
Indeed.